Good afternoon. Big news day in football. I'll discuss North Melbourne. Ben Amarfio and David Noble spoke this morning. Give you an update on that. Want to discuss Sam Fisher. Ross Lyon spoke on Footy Classified last night. I'll give you an update on the players' pay deal, the inside word on what's going on there. Also, a Thursday trade update, which I'll try to do on a consistent basis. But I think the big story for mine today continues to be Tasmania in the background. And I'll give you a brief update on what's going there, on there off the top this afternoon. I believe now the Tasmanian pitch is looking to include a private component to the pitch. That is the government contribution as well as looking at a private pitch. Of course, private ownership has briefly been, touted or discussed in the context of the Suns of the Giants, but only loosely. Private ownership in AFL was an issue back in the 80s with the likes of Bob Ansett and Jeffrey Edelston in respect of the Swans. And it was a controversial topic because, quite frankly, a lot of those private owners in those times ran out of money, including Christopher Skase. These days, I guess, with the billionaires, with crypto, with some of our traders, our successful people offshore, there's guys with deeper pockets. And I think that's a component that the Tasmanian consortium that is being assisted at the moment by guys like James Henderson, who manages Alistair Clarkson, like really, really smart people, are looking at private ownership as a part of that. One prominent football identity said to me this morning, there has to be a private or government contribution to this because the clubs can't be expected to contribute to the running costs on an ongoing basis of a team. The background is money. There's broad club support for Tasmania. There's broad AFL support, broadly speaking, for Tasmania, including by Gil McLachlan. There was a meeting, another one, between the AFL and the consortium last Friday. But what there isn't support at the moment from a number of clubs is for the clubs to subsidise this. And I know Caroline Wilson on Footy Classified last night suggested that, Gil's after 20 million or so for this to run. And Eddie Maguire on Footy Classified made some interesting comments last night, in relation to the costs.
I think that the numbers on Colin Carter's report were under. I think that every time the AFL have pitched an expansion team, they have been miles under in selling it to the presidents, and the presidents aren't going to cop it. And they are the figures, not if you want to, not in hoping, they are the figures that will give you a chance of having a successful team in Tasmania.
So put simply, the discussion's now turned from the fact that I think there's support in terms of a concept for a Tasmanian team, but we've got down to the detail now in terms of how much money people would contribute and how much it would cost. I think the Carter report suggested it would cost the government down there about $10 million or so a year. What Eddie's saying there is it's going to cost a significant amount more than that, based, for example, on the Giants, based on the cost of the Suns, based on the fact that it would be a start-up. And I know there's other club presidents that think the contribution from Tasmania should also include the money that Hawthorn and North will lose as a result of losing their sponsorship. So the discussion has turned to money, and it's my understanding that one of the trump cards, if you like, that the consortium is looking at is a private contribution in terms of some private equity into this proposal, which might alleviate some of the club's concerns. What the clubs are worried about is the government down there might guarantee this money for, say, 10 years. But if you take the Suns and the Giants, for example, this could be a problem for other clubs, the existing ones, in almost perpetuity. It might take decades for the franchise to be successful. The existing clubs don't want to be exposed. And one means of mitigating that, which I think the consortium's cotton onto, is looking at private ownership, which would be quite a revolutionary concept in the AFL. Keep an eye on it. Moving on to North Melbourne, a big discussion point this week. There's been some developments there this morning. Ben Amarfio, who did a members forum yesterday, as well as David Noble, did a public press conference this morning. Ben jumped in ahead of David Noble and spoke and took questions before their press conference. They're getting on the front foot, North Melbourne. Ben Amarfio, the CEO, emphasised that in his view, the club is united, dismissing this idea that players and staff are not discontent. That's what he says, players and staff, there's no discontent there. He also welcomed guys like Wayne Carey, who I'll get to in terms of his comments, back to the club, saying, look, they're happy if ex-players want to contribute to the club. David Noble said in regards to Horne-Francis that he wasn't suspended that week after he went to Adelaide. According to Noble, he just had to sit down with him and said there's protocols, for example, the drug testing. The clubs need to know where the players are. That didn't take place. There was no issues there in that regard, but the club needs to know where the players are, and they needed to know where he was, but dismissed talk that Horne-Francis was suspended. He also said it's quite normal for new draftees not to sign up to a subsequent deal straight away, so he doesn't seem too worried on that front. My understanding today is that there is now strong alignment between the president, the coach, and the CEO on this rebuild. I think they've got behind each other this week. There is a lot going on in the background. I spoke to Dennis Pagan this morning. He emphasised that the club just needs talent, and he thought the best way to retain Horne-Francis is to win games. He thinks they need to stick together, so he certainly wasn't inflammatory from that perspective. Dennis really, I thought, supporting what's going on at North Melbourne in many regards. There's a positive aspect to these three recruiters leaving. I'm not commenting on the merits of or how good a job the recruiters did. I presume they're all good at their positions. But, what that really does is what you've got there is now Brady Rawlings and Scott Clayton, who are in Scott Clayton's case, highly experienced recruiters. And a lot of clubs are running with one or two full-time recruiters. So what that's going to do is free up some football department salary space, which, as we know, is capped. And I think that'll allow North to chase and bolster their football department. So keep an eye on that space. Certainly a story I'm working on. I spoke to the Duck yesterday. He'd spoken and got some views from former players and felt compelled to speak out. The Duck doesn't usually buy into North Melbourne issues. He thinks they're at their lowest level. He would be prepared, Duck told me, to help out. He also spoke on the midweek rub on Triple M. He spoke to me for 7 News as well. He rejected the idea that North should move to Tasmania. He's worried that the club has become factionalised. And a separate source told me an example of that is that not all board members at the moment are across all of the key decisions. Separately, I learnt yesterday there's some prominent current supporters that are thinking of putting a ticket together. I think at the moment they're being talked out of that. And I know one prominent supporter is going to see Ben and Sonia Hood, the new president, tomorrow. So there's a lot happening in the background. But it's my understanding, just in summary, that there is now strong alignment this week between the CEO, the coach, and the president. I don't think we'll see any change on the coach, for example, imminently, which I think is quite significant. There was also a bit of pressure on Ben Amafio, the CEO. They're in behind him, which I think is good, just to editorialise a bit there. And I also think they'll be able to apply some of this recruiting money to bolster the football department. They'll have some extra money. So that's what's going on in terms of the latest at North Melbourne. An interesting industry discussion this week surrounding Sam Fisher. Of course, he's facing some very, very serious trafficking charges in regards to drugs. I used to interview Sam Fisher quite regularly, catch up with him occasionally, and I know a bit about what, got him to this point. I don't really want to go down that path because I don't want to affect the court proceedings or prejudge what's going on, so I want to be careful in terms of what I say. But a healthy, I think, discussion to come out of it this week is discussion regarding the illicit drugs policy. I've mentioned on this podcast before that that's now under review. It was due for review in 2019, but I know that Andrew Dillon from the AFL and Paul Marsh are now working through that. There's a lot of debates there. Should the AFL get involved in players' use of illicit drugs? To what extent should they? How do you work through the second and third strikes? We know there's only really ever been one player that's got to 3 strikes. It's controversial because obviously the club doctors can get involved at 2 strikes when the players self-report. Sometimes they self-report after going out and perhaps having drugs. Sometimes they self-report in different circumstances. There's a mental health component. There's a performance-enhancing component because if you go on mental health medication, that can affect the performance-enhancing status of the types of things you're taking. It's an immensely complex area. But I thought Ross Lyon was really well placed to speak regarding Sam Fisher last night. His former coach, Ross, clearly had a lot of admiration for Sam from a playing perspective, and this is what he said.
He always trained and he always played and he caused no headaches for me. But beneath the surface, clearly there was going on. But we'll get to the illicit drug policy with the AFL, but as a coach, you don't get any of that. It's the club doctor only, so I was never informed. So to me, what did I see? An incredible athlete, a lovely person, kind nature, that trained and played and was a star of the club.
Now, Eddie Maguire, also on Footy Classified last night, commented on the IDP, which is the illicit drugs policy, offering some interesting insight there. And he also commented on the type of support, which I thought was really interesting, that players get at clubs in regards to, their use of illicit drugs and their lifestyle generally.
We've got to get to the stage where we have to stop players getting on the drugs. At the moment, it is still about aiding people to get through. I love the health part of it, but I think we've got to go a little bit harder. By the way, I want to roll this through. These are the safety nets that are at clubs, because every time you pick it up, I get a bit tired of the newspapers saying, the clubs, I don't do anything for it. In no particular order, you walk into a club, you've got a leadership group around you, you've got teammates, you've got line coaches, you've got conditioners and trainers. When you're getting a rub down, Lloyd, you used to talk to your old trainer. Yeah. You've got nutritionists, you've got a head of football, you've got the head coach, you've got psychologists and a psychiatrist at Collingwood. Football administrators are there. The president's always walking around, director's always been there. Then you've got your parents, your friends, then you've got your manager, then you've got the Players Association. So how is this happening still?
Interesting comments there from Eddie regarding the illicit drugs policy. I think that'll be an increasing discussion point and debate in coming months. And there's a really mature discussion regarding that already happening. I contacted Grant Thomas, who also coached Sam Fisher during the week. He obviously was reluctant to buy in on camera, but he did say that he was reluctant to talk with the court case pending, but thought that the AFL, the Players Association, the clubs and the player managers have a critical role to play. Player manager accreditation should include proof of every player on their books having a LAF program, which is, I assume, a life after football program. So my head is more, this is what Grant said, around what's the next step for future players so you don't experience any more of these types of situations. That's from Grant Thomas during the week to me. And I'll whip through some issues finally in brief today. It's been a busy news day with a lot of complex topics, but I've tried to cover them as best I can. St Kilda, Hunter Clark won't return this weekend. He's under protocols in terms of obviously the COVID situation from St Kilda. The latest on the pay deal, in the background, the men's pay deal is going on at the moment. We know the women got a 94% increase, which is quite a separate situation because the AFL is trying to invest and grow that game. The men, I understand, are looking, according to my sources, this is a general view, for a 10 to 15% increase as part of the next CBA. Where that lands, I'm not sure. One view yesterday was that might land, say, between 5 and 7%, but there's a discussion going on in the background in regards to that at the moment. And a brief trade update. Angus Brayshaw continues to attract a lot of attention. A gun Melbourne player, obviously in huge demand from the Western Australian clubs. I think he's due at the halfway mark, which is basically now next week, to sit down with his manager, Tom Petroro, and start to discuss what he wants to do. So I think we'll start to get a better gauge on what Angus wants to do over the next couple of weeks. I'm also under the strong impression, and just to emphasise and for clarity here, not through any direct Collingwood sources, I don't have a conflict on this reporting this, but through my trade sources, I believe that Collingwood is now looking at offering Jordan De Goey more of a short-term deal at this stage that might include good money and lots of incentives, but a short-term deal to protect themselves as opposed to a long-term one. Now, that situation will play out in the next 4, 8, 12 weeks. But what Collingwood do with De Goey and how much they offer him will be a bit of a pointer, I think, to where they see the list and what they want to do going forward. Because if they do sort of effectively let De Goey go, because other clubs, I think, are interested in De Goey. I think St Kilda's informally at least sounding him out or looking at him at least. That would require board approval if they proceeded to sound him out. I don't think they've spoken to him yet. They haven't spoken to him yet. But basically, if Collingwood almost let De Goey go, what it's signalling is they want to get that pick in and start to look to sort of rebuild, medium to long term, say 3 to 6 years. So we'll get a bit of a pointer to that. Having said that, they're going, I shouldn't say they're going well on the field. They had a great win over Fremantle last week, and they'll get a good test against the Blues on Sunday. I'll have the latest news on this podcast tomorrow. I'll be up in Sydney in the morning, going to the game tomorrow night, so I'll have a bit of insight on Friday night football. But thanks so much for joining us. A busy news day headlined by that news that I've got. But I think the Tasmanians are now looking at a private contribution to their proposal to alleviate partly some of the club's concerns about some type of, perpetual problem financially created for the other clubs. Keep a close eye on that. I'll have more news tomorrow.
That was Tom Brown's News. Come back every Monday, Thursday and Friday for more, and subscribe to Triple M Footy on Listener or wherever you listen to get all our podcasts throughout the season. For Ream Hot Water and McDonald's, Triple M rocks footy.